everyone, my name is Emily and today I'm going to share with you every single book I read in the month of February. I had a pretty good reading month in February. I finished 9 books and all of them I at least liked okay. I wouldn't say I had a ton of home runs this month, but it was a pretty decent reading month. I got a lot of reading done. I've decided this time I'm going to start with the books that I liked least and then end with my favorites. My least favorite book of the month was Scream-Free Parenting by Hal Edward Runkle. This just didn't really do it for me as a parenting book. I didn't feel like it had very much concrete advice on how to not scream at your kids. It felt like he was saying, you know what? If you want to not scream at your kids, what you should really do is not scream at your kids. That's what you should do. It's so obvious. So yeah, I didn't find that particularly useful. I didn't really disagree with any of the advice in this book. I just didn't find it to be particularly groundbreaking. It wasn't very actionable. I thought the book wasn't really super well organized. I give it like a C+. If you want to see more of my thoughts on this, you can go watch the vlog that I made about it where I read from my TBR shelf. But yeah, this one, I'm getting rid of it. I never need to read that again. Next, we have The Spanish Armada by Robert Hutchinson. I thought this book was totally fine. I highly recommend it if The Spanish Armada is your life, but otherwise it wasn't super interesting. Next we have Behind Every Good Man by Sarah Goodman Confino. I have so many complicated feelings about this book. There were things about it that I really liked, and there were things about it that were not my favorite. It's a story about a woman who, in the very beginning of the book, her husband works in politics. He works for a senator's campaign. She discovers that her husband is cheating, so she decides, I'm not dealing with this, we're getting a divorce. And so to get a job to support herself, she's gonna go out and join the campaign and try to be the campaign manager for the opposing campaign of what her husband is working on. I thought this was a fun premise. I really enjoyed this character in the beginning. I liked her relationship with her mother. That was really fun. The setting of the 60s was interesting, but boy, was I annoyed by the romance. Now, to be fair, I'm not really into romance. It's not really a genre that I enjoy, but I found the romance to really get in the way of what was actually a good story. It felt like we had this smart character who really believed in herself and who was just getting out of a years-long relationship with a man that she had kids with, all of these things. She just quickly hopped right into another romance with another person who was just this perfect man who could never do any wrong, which is one of the things that I find most annoying in romance, is that the men are always so perfect. They never do anything wrong. And if they do anything wrong, you discover later that they had a really good reason. They're not very realistic. And I definitely felt that way about this one. And it's just like, surely this woman she wasn't even divorced yet for most of the book, because she was already hopping into this romance with another guy who was her boss, by the way, and that was never really explored in a way that I found meaningful. It felt like it just didn't matter that he was her boss. So I just did not appreciate this relationship, and it just took up too much of the book. It shouldn't have even been the book at all. I thought this would have been such a great book in so many ways if the romance had not been in it. I also didn't like the ending. I'm gonna spoil it. You can skip ahead a little bit if you want to avoid it, but just skip to the next book. I'm gonna put timestamps in. But in the end, basically, her husband, her major problem throughout the book was that her husband was horrible, and he was basically just trying to punish her and trying to make her life miserable. And then all of a sudden at the end of the book, he was like, you know what? I don't want to make your life miserable. I want us to get along. And so then it all just went away magically, and it had nothing to do with the character figuring things out or, solving her own problems. It was just kind of, he was the one who decided to stop being horrible. So it just wasn't very satisfying as an ending for me. I also found, I'm sorry, I'm just going to keep rambling on about this book, but she made a big mistake. She made a critical error in the book, and it was because of the romance, which is okay. All right, I get it. Characters make mistakes. That's part of a character arc. Okay, even though I thought it was such a stupid mistake and it wasn't enjoyable to read about. But then it felt like the book was trying to make it seem like, well, it wasn't a mistake. She didn't do anything wrong. What she did was totally fine. And I'm sitting here thinking, was it fine? Really? It wasn't a mistake for her to kiss somebody on the street where anybody could have seen her when she's going through a contentious divorce and her husband is trying to find evidence that she's the cheater? Really? Obviously, I am getting way too worked up about this. So we're gonna move on, but that one, because I did like things about it, I didn't like things about it, it kind of just ended up being middle of the road, kind of 3-star type of book. All right, next I want to talk about The Herbal Year by Christina Hart Davies. I found this book in England. Now, I'm not actually really into herbal remedies, but I wanted to read this for research for my book that I'm writing. I actually found it to be a really enjoyable read, even for somebody who I don't actually really care about the subject matter that much other than for research purposes, but I thought it was interesting and it was really well written, and it has these gorgeous illustrations. Just look at these end papers. How beautiful. I just loved the illustrations all throughout the book of the different plants. I mean, I probably wouldn't recommend it if you're not interested in the subject matter, but if you are, it was great. Next, we have The Lion Women of Tehran by Marjan Kamali, and I read The Stationery Shop by the same author, but I did not like the just plot of that book, I guess. There were a lot of things I did like about it. I liked the historical stuff. I thought the characters were well done. I thought the atmosphere was really well done, and the culture was really interesting that she was talking about, but I just didn't like the whole romance aspect of it. So I was excited to see that she had written a book that was also about Iran and the history and the culture there, but it was not a romance, and instead is a story about a friendship. And I liked it. I thought it was really good. I love reading a good friendship story. I thought it did such a good job of exploring the nuances of this relationship between these two women and how they impacted each other. I loved that the main character was not somebody who was like out there fighting for women's rights. Her friend was. She was really politically active, but the main character who did most of their narration was just, or not the narration, but who it was focused more on. She was more just like, she wanted to get married, she wanted to have a comfortable life, but she did try to be a good friend, and she did care about things. And then in the end, I just loved how it ended up working out that she could also be called a Lion Woman of Tehran, even though she wasn't this politically active person. And it felt very much like it was not, the book wasn't making a judgment on who made the right choice or who did the better thing. It was like different women doing all sorts of different things can really impact the world in different ways, and they can be considered lion women. And I loved that. I thought it was just beautiful. I loved both of the characters. It was a little bit of a quieter book. There were times that it got a little bit slow, but overall, I thought it was a really good read. Next, we have The Phoenix Crown by Kate Quinn and Janie Chang. I was excited to read this because a few months ago now, I read The Briar Club by Kate Quinn, and that was actually my first book that I read by her, and I loved it. I thought it was incredible. So I was excited to read another one of hers. Also, I've heard of Janie Chang's books. I haven't read any of them yet, so I was interested to see something from her. I thought The Phoenix Crown was really good. I really liked learning about San Francisco and Chinatown, the earthquake in, I think it was 1906, and, the impact that had. And, there were a lot of really interesting things. I thought the characters were really interesting. The plot moved along nicely. I liked the pacing. I liked the writing. I thought it was good. The two things about it that made me a little one is just, I think, how I read it, which is totally a me issue and not really an issue with the book, but I am very much a print reader. I like to read with my eyes. I don't really like to read audiobooks or listen to audiobooks, but I did do a pretty fair chunk of this book on audio. So I think because it took me weeks and weeks just to get through the first third of the book, it just felt like I was reading it so long, which made me feel like it was moving slowly, even though it wasn't. That was definitely a me thing, but I just feel like because of that, just the way that I read it, just impacted my experience with it. Another thing was that there was a little plot device that was used in the Briar Club and was also used in this book. It wasn't a plot device that like significantly changed the reading experience or whatever. It's just sort of like a tricky little, a little way to like kind of trick the reader a little bit, which I thought was, when I read the Briar Club, I thought it was fine. I didn't necessarily love it, but I didn't hate it. I thought it was kind of fun. And then, but reading it again, like the same exact little plot device in this one, I was like, do we need to do it twice? Especially because these books came out in the same year. Both of these books came out in 2024. The Phoenix Crown came out like toward the beginning of the year, and then the Briar Club toward the end, which, by the way, I mean, good job, Kate Quinn. Like, that's pretty amazing to get these two works out so close to each other. Yeah, it was just, I kind of felt like, we're doing this again? I don't know. That was not a big deal. Ultimately, I did like this book. I don't know that I feel like it's so super memorable or that it was, that I felt like super emotionally connected to it, but it was fun. It was interesting. Yeah, it was just overall pretty good. Next, let's talk about The Champagne Letters by Kate McIntosh. So this is a debut. I think the cover is so beautiful. I was expecting something kind of light and maybe lighthearted, maybe kind of rom-com-y. And I will say that I was pleasantly surprised with how the book went. Now, I'm not going to say like there was some big thriller type plot twist or anything. It's not a thriller, but just I liked the way the story ended up. I thought it was very fun and very interesting, and I thought the author did such a good job of making me think I knew what was going on, but also in the back of my mind I was like, I don't know about this. I'm a little suspicious, and I had like just the right amount of suspicion of what I thought might be going on. And anyway, I don't want to spoil it at all, but I thought it was a lot of fun to read about. I also loved that it was a dual timeline. It was mainly focused on a present day timeline of a woman who like goes to Paris to sort of figure things out after a divorce. But then it also had a past timeline about this woman, the widow Clicquot, who built a champagne business in the 19th century around in the time of Napoleon. And I was pleasantly surprised when I finished it to discover from the author's note that this was actually a real person that this was based on, and that she really did this, and that was really interesting. I loved also that the book got into with this past timeline. This woman was like really inspiring as a businesswoman, and she really cared about her business, but it did kind of show how there's a cost to that, and not necessarily that it was saying don't do it. You know, I think it was very positive overall of like, this is a woman who's very inspiring, who did so much in a time when it was so hard and blah, blah, blah. But also she really in many ways made a lot of sacrifices with her relationship with her daughter. And that's just kind of like how it had to be back then. And she had to grapple, the character had to grapple with this and kind of come to terms with it. I just enjoy a little bit of nuance because it's not always so clear cut. It's not always so black and white of like, what is the right choice for a woman, because women can have many different right choices. It's different for different individuals. So I just really enjoyed that the book explored that a little bit, and it wasn't super black and white. Overall, I just really enjoyed The Champagne Letters, and I'll be looking forward to seeing what else Kate McIntosh writes. I'm going to be keeping an eye on her. And next we have From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler by E.L. Konigsberg. I hate the title of this book, but I loved the book. I thought it was so cute. It was so fun. Just a great children's book. It made me really wish that I had read this as a kid so that I could know what I would have thought of it as a kid, because I think I would have really liked it, and I just wish that I could get in the brain of like little Emily and see what she would have thought of this. But it definitely took me back to my childhood and the way that I used to think and imagine things and the adventures that I wanted to have. So it was just a really sweet book, and I had a lot of fun reading it. And lastly, my favorite book that I read in February was actually also the first book that I finished in February, and that was The Stolen Queen by Fiona Davis. This was just such a fun book about art and history and the Met and artifacts and who do they belong to and Egyptian archaeology and all of these things, and fashion, even though I don't really care about fashion, but it was still fun. And I loved the characters. I especially loved one of the main characters. I think her name was Annie, that she was this younger woman who had kind of this toxic relationship with her mother, where her mother's always taking advantage of her. But she was also a very proactive character, and she was like, I want a better life for myself. I want to go out there and be confident and like get what I want out of life. And I just thought she was such a fun character to follow because she kept, you know, doing things and like putting herself out there being like, oh my gosh, did I do the right thing? And I guess I just related to her a lot in that way. And I also did enjoy the other main character who was an older woman, and it kind of kept going back in time to seeing like what happened to her. She was on this archaeological dig in Egypt, and she got married and just like had some traumatic things happen to her in the past, and so she has to confront that. And then also there's this heist in the middle of it of this precious artifact, and so they go to Egypt to try to find it. And I just thought I loved the mixture of plot and character in this book. I think it did such a great job of having a very forward-moving plot that was very exciting, but I also thought the characters did a lot of the heavy lifting and they were really interesting. It was just such a fun book. Highly recommend it for fans of historical fiction. So that's everything that I read in the month of February. I hope you have a fantastic beginning to your spring. I know I'm excited for warmer weather, and I will see you with another video soon. Bye!